Good day to you all, safety champions out there, and welcome on board of season number 4 of the aviation focus sessions. It's easy to forget that thousands of professionals in Africa, you and my guests here at the table, work hard every day at making commercial aviation the safest form of transport, also in Africa. And you don't do that because you expect special recognition. You think safety and act in ways that promote safety because you know the aviation industry and your country depends on that, and because it is the right thing to do. With the focus sessions, AviAssist brings you affordable and certified continuous professional development to help raise the bar on safety in Africa. We inform, inspire and entertain African aviation safety in our focus sessions. We will also be answering questions from you, our viewers. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. This episode is sponsored by aircraft manufacturer ATR, and today we'll be talking about systems thinking. Systems thinking to help us understand what really happened and not just point the finger at one or a few individuals. At the table I'm joined by air traffic controller Marvin Rangarira. Marvin featured in a heartwarming one-on-one interview in 2021, talking about his career in Zimbabwe, South Africa and the Netherlands. And that episode is actually still available to watch whenever you want on our YouTube channel. Welcome back to the table, Marvin, and great to have you with us today here again.
Thank you.
Our second guest is Captain Mary Mukulu, all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. Mary has been a long-time pilot with Kenya Airways, was the manager of flight operations at one of Africa's leading civil aviation authorities, the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, and is currently Chief Operations Officer with Pineal Air in Nairobi. Mary, welcome to the Dutch capital of TV, Hilversum.
Thank you, thank you.
Did you have a good journey over here, I hope?
Yes, I did.
On board of one of our sponsors, perhaps, Kenya Airways? Or? No, okay. Well, still, other brands are available.
But yeah, from the UK, I came with British Airways.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Well, welcome to the studio anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And our third guest is Professor Graham Braithwaite, Professor of Safety and Accident Investigation at the world-famous Cranfield University in the United Kingdom. A regular speaker across the globe on aviation safety and an independent safety advisor for 2 major airlines, including British Airways. Well, a warm welcome to you as well, Graham, and good to have you here in the studio, and a privilege as well.
Oh, thank you. It's really great to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, in all, a nice and diverse number of voices here represented at the table, and I would say let's get started on systems thinking. It took decades to convince our industry that we must address the human factor in our system. Now we are faced with the challenge of a next move, a move to systems thinking. An approach in which every accident, every incident should be regarded firstly as a failure of the system and not of a person. Let's start with you, Graham, with a question from Pierre Rusangwa from Rwanda, actually, who asks what actually is systemic thinking or systems thinking?
Yeah, it's a really important question for us to start with. So systems thinking is really about recognising there are many component parts to any system, and it's the performance of those component parts together, which is what we're most interested in. Aviation's a really good example of what we call a socio-technical system.
Okay.
So it's a fancy,
hang on.
fancy word
Yes.
for just describing the fact that we've got people and technology working in close proximity, and they've both got strengths, and the question is how do you draw upon the greatest strengths of those? So you know, no decision is taken out of the context of the culture or the trading environment and so on, and how does that then translate onto performance in the flight deck or in the air traffic control tower or in the design of aircraft? So systems thinking is about trying to understand how all of those interactions come together to deliver that overall performance.
So I guess it's important because people might think, does this mean this is the end of us paying attention to the human factor? But you're saying it's people and technology, so it's still important also to look after that human factor.
I think it's critically important, and if we talk systems engineering, we might focus just on engineered systems, but technology
yeah.
works brilliantly until it meets people who then use it in different ways. And that's not a criticism, because actually often people can find a better way to use the technology or to go past the limitations of that technology. So, when we talk about safety, you often talk about the things that go wrong. Actually, if we start to talk about the things that go right, you realise that it's the strength of that relationship between technology and people that actually generally delivers a good result.
Okay, so a move globally to this systemic thinking, as it's also being called, looking at the system as a whole. Mary, if I come to you with your experience in the cockpit and the regulator, etc., what steps do you think we as an industry, and perhaps particularly in Africa, can take to make that move to systemic thinking?
I think systemic thinking, for us to be able to work together, even as Professor has mentioned, is something that needs to be integrated. So if you're looking in terms of working in the cockpit, we can't be isolated per se. We have to make sure that we incorporate all the other people. We are working with the cabin crew, working with the ground staff, we're working with the engineers. And we need to be able, especially right now, because everything is rush, everybody wants to be on-time performance.
Yeah.
We want to be able to be more efficient, need to be able to reduce down on our costs. So we can't act like robots, having that on-time performance, and then something else will lack behind as a result of that. So that way we should be able to look at the whole system holistically and see which places that we need to adjust. And in terms of even for the regulatory side of view, as much as we have regulations that help with safety, to ensure that, of course, we have safe skies, to ensure that we have security in the aviation industry, we need to be able to collaborate with the operators to ensure that everything flows.
You mean as a regulator, you would have to work with the operators as well?
Yeah. Yes, please, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll come back to you in a moment as well to find out, are there specific steps you think we can take in the industry? But let's first go to Marvin, because with Mary we have the regulator experience and the cockpit experience. You have a different background in air traffic control.
Yeah.
How is that for you when you think of systemic thinking, systems thinking?
Yeah, it's well and good when the regulator talks about safety and systems, but what happens on the ground is something else. Like I remember when I worked in one of the systems, when you make a mistake, it's a blame game out there. You'll be punished for it. Like as an air traffic controller, you're sitting there, you make a mistake, they'll pull you out of the position, and it's like a stigma that you carry for the rest of your life, that you made that mistake and it was yours. Instead of looking at the whole picture, like my colleagues were saying, to say, it might not be the person, but the system in which the person is working that is a problem that needs investigation and that needs correction. So I think we need to really take this a little bit seriously, also in operations, and have a change of the way we approach it, and not look at individuals, but look at it as a system. We talk of just culture, and but whether that is being applied fully, it's
And it's a gradual process, because I would imagine perhaps the experience you spoke about might have been some years ago.
Yeah.
So possibly the operator you worked for then might have changed in that respect as well, because I think in the end it's a gradual process, I think.
Yeah,
isn't it?
indeed.
Is it also, Graham, if you look at the research side, because Cranfield is also heavily involved in research, is that also something you've perhaps spotted in research you've done across the globe?
Yeah, it's certainly borne out. Sometimes research points towards how it should work in theory, or what we're aspiring to, and that's really important, but the application can be quite challenging. And Just Culture is the perfect example of that, because it does work in that system context, because yes, it matters to this individual and their line manager within that organisation, but the other organisations around them sometimes expect something that's far less just. So not every regulator is suitably enlightened when it comes to acknowledging that people make mistakes, and we design a system for that. We design redundancy into the system. We write procedures to capture the fact that we know humans are never 100% reliable. Mm-hmm. So when something does go wrong, why are we surprised and then choose to blame an individual? And often that says something about the manager
and the culture.
As that starts to propagate, that it feels like the right thing to do, because if it's your fault, it's not my fault.
Yeah. You don't have to consider everything that happens behind.
And sometimes that's the fear with this systemic view, that we're saying, it's no longer the pilot or the air traffic controller, it's their boss, or it's the regulator. And that's not really the point. The point has always been, where are the opportunities to fix it for next time?
Yep.
not just to punish for this time.
To move away from blame, but look at remedy, basically. How can we avoid a similar thing? Because we do have a separate episode of the focus sessions available about just culture and about the blame. So I would invite viewers to look at that as well. But I think, Mary, if I can take it back to you, you mentioned the example of when you are flying, you take the approach, you take the workload of the cabin crew into account. But I think what as a regulator, in your function as a regulator before, you're also looking for is not just in that aircraft, but also what happens in the boardroom, what happens in the office of the Director of Human Resource Management. All that should be part of that systemic thinking, I think, as well. Or
no, I totally agree with that. And how we can look at it in terms of most of the time, it's not just the airline I worked for, but in general, you'll find that the people in management don't have a technical background.
Okay.
So it makes sense to them on paper, profits and losses and the on-time performance, and we need to win all these accolades and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't have the technical background, then it's very difficult for you to have that 360 view. So when the pilot or the cabin crew or the ground staff or the ground handler or the engineer is trying to explain something, you don't understand. So they also have to be taken through this entire process and to be shown that they are a part of the process, because you can find here something happens in the air traffic control room, it happens in the cockpit, it might happen in the check-in counter, but the issue may have started from the CEO's office, cascading down to where it is. So if we do not investigate, you'll keep on blaming the ground staff.
The person at the sharp end, as
yes,
they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the problem is not there. The system is looking at it the wrong way. So it should be taken overall in general.
Okay, I think that brings us maybe on track of how can we then, because if I understand you correctly, you're saying one of the challenges might sometimes be that a manager or a chief of a department has perhaps less exposure to that practical environment. So then, Marvin, if I take that to you, maybe digging back in all those years, but perhaps also in your current role here in the Netherlands, how do you think we can make that distance smaller between the management and the operational staff? Any suggestions?
I think training will go a long way. Training of our leaders within the systems for them to understand why they should change their perspective when it comes to their way of thinking into systems thinking. And if they could partner with organizations like yours, Aviassist, some of it doesn't even require money. Okay. It's attending courses, and then if they know the advantages of them doing it, that is a motivation in and of itself. And on the other hand, also for us who operate on the ground, it's such a relief to know that when I make a mistake, though it's unlikely, it's not an outcome that I want, but I won't be blamed for it. But me reporting it would eventually help the system to improve, because not only will I be blamed, but I'll be trained if I need the training. So it's an opportunity for improvement when I make a mistake. So if the perspective changes, then the whole system improves and the whole safety aspect of it improves.
Fair point. But if I'm trying to be the devil's advocate now, and maybe I'll come to Mary on this one, because you've worked in these three domains, a major operator, the regulator, and now in a smaller operator. If I would be the chief financial officer, I can say that's all very nice what Marvin says, but I don't have time to sit in a course for 5 days to listen to safety management or to understand engineering. What would you say to such a person?
I would actually tell the person very politely that you are in the aviation industry, and you need to be able to know the environment and the reason why you're in the aviation industry. It's a very unique industry, and I always tell the people, especially the ones working in the office, it's unfortunate that the majority of the laws in aviation are written in blood. And as a result of that, you have to take it very seriously. So if you feel you cannot sit in class, maybe just change and move to another career. Somewhere else as an accountant.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to speak to a whole group of students who wanted to become aviation managers, and I asked them how many people thought they were going to be in a safety role. A few people put their hands up, and they tended to be the people who were a pilot or an air traffic code by background.
Yeah.
The rest, I had to say, well, look, I'm going to break it to you that every role is a safety role. And I don't say that as a pithy phrase. It's that everybody affects a business that is built on safety. If you don't have that, you just don't have a business in aviation. You shouldn't be there.
So what you're saying, these were students in aviation management across the board, prepared for not operational roles as such, perhaps, but...
Exactly, and therefore they needed somebody to help them understand that, a decision about scheduling or where you fly or the aircraft you buy has influence, and it has influence on the training you might need to provide, the change management that you might need to go through. All of those things have an influence. I think this comes back to this systems thinking. How best do you help people understand their actions? That you might say, well, the safety person, they do safety. No. They're the person that helps you do safety.
It's for all of you.
They're an advocate, but at the end of the day, it's the decisions of everybody, and it's often those senior leaders. The thing I was going to add to Marvin's point, though, is as well as training, you just get out the office. And we call it management by walking around.
Yeah.
And there was a wonderful example of that, and it actually came here in the Netherlands from Shell, and it was somebody who worked in production, nothing to do with aviation. And he said every time he met his managers at their regular appraisals, he'd ask about that, and they'd all agree that getting out there onto the hangar floor or into
so important.
So important. And he would then say, just show me the last 3 months of your calendar, and show me where you put that time in. And of course, what he meant then was everybody's aspiration to do it, which
but
was
in
always
reality,
filled. And the pandemic made that worse. Everybody's filling your calendar slots, and so people knew it was important. They wanted to do it, but unless they forced the time into the calendar, people didn't do it. So I think that's a really easy takeaway for people.
Okay, we'll continue the discussion in a moment. First, it's time for the first letter of the prize draw. Now, before I give you that first letter, let me tell you about our prize draw. In this draw, you have a chance to win $100 in cash in each episode. And we do this for 2 reasons. The first is that the game will give you some insight into what inspires my guests here at the table. And the second one is simple. It gives you a chance to win $100. You'll see a web address at the bottom of the screen. And at that page, you can submit the 3 letters that I'll give you throughout the broadcast, and that, together, form a 3-letter code. Every 10 minutes or so, we'll show you one of the favorite books of a guest here at the table. And all you have to do is write down the first letter of the first name of the author. And you'll end up with a 3-letter code. You enter those 3 letters on the Google form page and then click Submit. But you can only submit your 3-letter code until 15 minutes after the end of this focus session. From among the correct answers, we'll draw one lucky winner and send that person her or his $100 by mobile money. And we'll announce the winner on our LinkedIn page, so that's a good reason to follow us on LinkedIn. And our first book today is taken to the studio, I think, by you, Mary.
Yes.
Things Fall Apart, a classic African piece of literature by Chinua Achebe. So the only thing you have to know is the first letter of the first name, which in this case is the C, the Charlie. Briefly, Mary, what does this book mean to you?
I love the book. It's centered on a gentleman called Okonkwo, and it looks at 3 generations. Okonkwo could not stand the father because he thought the father was lazy. And then he worked really, really, really hard to ensure that everything succeeds with him. And then it goes to a place where now he's torn between culture. It's when the British come in to take over.
The book plays in?
The place where it is, yes.
In Nigeria? Or?
Yes, it's in Nigeria, based in Nigeria. And then you have the son that Okonkwo is trying to raise, not to end up like his father, his grandfather, but to be as hardworking as him. And he ends up failing Okonkwo.
Yes.
So that's why things are falling apart. Not because he's not working hard, but it seemed like every time he works hard, something keeps on coming up. So in the Nigerian culture, they have something called chi, which is, they call it their personal god. So the phrase that really breaks my heart sometimes, it says, Okonkwo worked so hard, but his chi said no. So it's a very interesting.
And how does it inspire you? Does it inspire you in some respects? Or?
It inspires me in a way to say that sometimes you do everything that you know to do, but it may not necessarily end up the way you want.
Because your chi is not
I
favourable.
don't really want to say your chief said no, because I don't believe in that one. But it's just to say that you can't give up, and you can always just try and understand one another. Because if Okonkwo just understood his son, then things would have been better.
So almost a system in itself, the three generations, I think.
Yes.
Thanks for taking that to the studio. Brings us back to systems thinking. Before we go there, next to the cash prize, I have to say something else to the people out there. You can get another reward from our focus sessions, because we also offer you a chance to qualify for a certificate of attendance, following requests from our viewers. To qualify for a certificate of attendance, you must watch 100% of each session and score 75% or higher on the end assessment that will become available on our website after this broadcast. But the assessment will only be available for 48 hours after the broadcast. That means you best watch the live broadcast so that you have enough time to complete the assessment on our website. Right, enough about rewards you can get. Let's get back into systems thinking. Mary, if I can come to you. We briefly spoke about the suggestion that Marvin gave to help us move in that direction of system thinking, training. Any other things that come to mind based on your experience that you think if we would implement this, it would help us make that move?
I think for me, my key is attitude.
Okay.
Yes, just to say on what Professor said, if you're in the aviation industry, just have a positive attitude. Not the know-it-all, but that every day things keep changing, and that you have that attitude that you want to grow, you want to learn, you want to change, and you want to be able to help somebody else. So that one doesn't take training, because you can be trained and your attitude is still wrong.
Yeah.
So it's just change your attitude and have a positive attitude towards safety and the systems thinking.
And to some extent, if I hear you correctly, maybe a humble attitude, where you say indeed you can learn from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Attitude is a difficult thing to change, isn't it, or to adopt to people. I think that's also one of the things we see as Aviassist with the courses, that online training is fantastic for knowledge transfer, but to change or to work with people on their attitude is quite a challenge in a course if it's not based in the classroom. Graham, your views in terms of the attitude, how can we work on that, you think?
It's challenging because you want the message to be meaningful to the individual and to their context. And I think too many times when we talk about safety, we talk about some of the big events that sometimes people find hard to relate to. It feels like a wholly different world, and actually what people best relate to are the things that they can imagine happening to themselves or
on a daily basis,
operation.
Yeah.
So that lived experience is incredibly useful, and I think making sure that we have the confidence to share that is important. Now everybody plays a role in that. So the regulator plays a role in creating that safe space that people feel open to report, even if nothing broke or nobody got injured, and therefore it's not mandatory to report it. Actually, the lessons learned can be incredibly useful. In our flying operation, we had a small event this week where somebody lost consciousness on the jump seat. And it didn't last very long, but what it highlighted for us was actually the seat restraint doesn't hold them in the seat. So for a period of time, one of the pilots was having to hold this person in their seat. Now the person that lost consciousness was really embarrassed about that. So we had to create that psychological safety so that we could have a discussion, because actually what that did for us as an organisation was highlighted a risk. And together, we can come up with a solution to that. So it was a really valuable learning experience, but that's quite a thing to make it that safe space and then encourage alternative perspectives. And I think sometimes the higher you go, the more you think you should know the answer. Yeah. And actually, no, that's the point. You should become more humble.
Yeah.
Marvin, I see you say
Interestingly, I'm looking back at myself and how I've been looking at systems thinking throughout my career. I think we lack exposure to experience how other people are doing it.
Okay.
There's a tendency to just sticking to what you know, what worked best when you trained like 20 years ago. No, not anymore. That does not get us anywhere. Like what Mary said, change. You should be looking for change so that we can become better. So I think it is actually an advantage for you to go out there and expose yourself to the systems that are working. Like, for example, I've worked in a system where if an incident happens, you write it down in a book, right?
Yeah.
Which everybody is going to look at. and then you would sign at the end. You know, that's what occurred on that day, and then you put it there. So that book is there. Everybody can see what you did.
The book of bad behavior.
And yeah, psychologically, it affects you when you write something down as soon as it happens. Yeah. But I've also worked in a system where you go on a computer, you just type it in, done, it's gone. And then it quickly goes to the safety office and everybody...
And not never to everybody who can read it there and then.
And that way, it's so subtle things that are done, small little things, which builds up to eventually the individual attitude that everybody has towards safety. And I think, yeah, we need exposure to see how the systems or how other people are approaching the system's way of thinking and how it's benefiting them. I think when you see how other systems are doing, you can also get to see the advantages of...
Instead of just a theory of what it should look like.
Yeah.
Well, and I think in all fairness, you know, you speak of exposure, that's also what these sessions are about, you know, it's continuous professional development, because I think, indeed, Marvin, like you said, we've also seen as Aviassist a lot that getting access to this continuous professional development after qualification is a challenge in many African places, unfortunately. So yeah, let's think of, indeed, other ways in which we can perhaps get that exposure. Any suggestion from you, Mary, in terms of, you know, there are focus sessions, yes, but we can't reach yet the whole of Africa. What other options are there, you think, to get that exposure?
I think the other way is just to take advantage, like the regional offices. We have ICAO, and we have the regional offices all over. Like now for us, we have the ESAF side, the East African side, and then we have WACA on the west. And I think up in North Africa, a part of it is connected to Europe, but we can all work together. Then if maybe we have a collaboration or partnership, that when they are having their workshops, which they have them many times, they can be able to squeeze in 15 minutes, you know, just open discussion, hey, what's happening in your CAA, in your country, and how can we improve things? Then that way someone doesn't feel the pressure of I have to be in a class, but they'll be able to make contributions that can be able to help other people in the authority. Yeah.
What we very often do, which may be good for a meeting like that, I think, and perhaps is very known to Graham coming from the UK, is applying the Chatham House rules in those cases. Because if you don't, you know, this rule basically states that what happens in that room stays in that room. Because I can imagine sometimes when people would, you know, divulge something like Graham just said in an ICAO meeting, they might think, well, you know, this is going to come back when I'm being audited. So using something like these Chatham House rules really helps, I think, to create that transparency. Graham, from your side?
Yeah, it's really interesting because one of the airlines that I've had some involvement with, which is TUI, it's a holiday airline.
Yes.
Their safety review board gets together every quarter, and it's all the senior post holders, the chief executive, and they talk about everything that could possibly go wrong. And they invite me as an independent, and they invite the flight ops inspector and the airworthiness surveyor from the regulator. They don't have to. And in fact, the first few times they invited the regulator, they didn't come because the regulator was really nervous. You know, why are we being invited into this conversation? And actually, the airline's logic was we would much rather you know us properly. And if there's something that worries you, then please say so, because then we can do something with it. But we'd much rather you know, have fuller access to us in terms of evidence. But also in exchange, we'd really like you to tell us how we're doing. And it's not to come in and name your competitors and you know, it's all done in confidence, but they might say you're quite different to all the other carriers in this regard. Your risk is different or your approach is different. And that's really, really valuable.
And I think what's very interesting of your point there is, so it wasn't necessarily the airline being reluctant to get the CA, and it was the regulator being reluctant to go into the meeting. Which is...
Yes, and because it was unusual, you know, and other operators were not doing that, but it showed a sort of maturity of their approach. It said a lot about the CEO, a lady called Chris Brown, who always asked really good questions. And I'll let you into a little secret about her. Actually, she's quite a nervous flyer.
Okay.
And actually, not because she knows something bad, but because just genuinely she is, like lots of people who travel. And actually, it makes her ask really good questions because on behalf of all the other nervous passengers, she wants to know, have we fixed this? Have we learned from it? What are we doing to prevent next time? So actually, it creates that humility you talked of earlier on to make sure that the leadership are doing the right thing.
Excellent. Well, it's time to take a short break for a message from one of our sponsors, aircraft manufacturer ATR. Let's look at their message. We cannot do our work without our sponsors, friends and corporate friends. So in this case, thank you very much, aircraft manufacturer ATR. Before we get back to systems thinking, time for our second book. This book is called Build the Life You Want. It's written by Arthur C. Brooks. The only letter that's important for you out there is the A, the alpha. I think it was Marvin who brought this.
That's my book, yeah.
Why? What does this book mean to you?
So this book, I was intrigued by it. At Harvard University, they have a module that's called happiness. Okay. So they actually study happiness. And when I looked at it, I was like, okay, why do people need to study happiness? And then after I got exposed to the book, it's got quite interesting ideas there. It talks of 4 things that are important to your happiness, which is your friends, your family, as well as your work, as well as your faith. And it's got interesting insights in there that when you look at things that, every day it's around you, but how you take it in, like your work, for example, is it fulfilling enough? Mm-hmm. How close are you with your friends, with your family? Do you have good relations? Those are the essential ingredients to a happier life. Not happy, but happier.
Happier, yeah.
Everybody has a potential to be happier. Mm-hmm. If you look at that, if you consider those
the lessons ideas. From and I think this also ties to our discussion here. I think because overall, that's also what we try to really train our trainees in Rwanda about. The try. It's not always easy, but try and find a job that really makes you happy, that feels like it's an extension of you as a person as opposed to just a matter of earning money. Is that something we also can take on board, you think, when it comes to systems thinking? Would happiness help, you think?
I think, it would. If I'm happy at my place of work, then I would go that extra mile. I wouldn't, when I take the courses that you're saying, goes back to the attitude I talked about. If you're happy, then you'll be willing to help. When they're looking for peer mentors, you'd be more than happy to volunteer as a peer mentor because you're happy and you're happy to, pass the knowledge and the information. Yeah. Okay. If something goes wrong also, you'll be happy to,
share. Marvin, a question that came from Helen actually in Rwanda. Mm-hmm. You spoke about the safety culture briefly in your earlier statements. Helen asks, how does a positive safety culture impact morale, engagement and safety performance? If you look back at your career so far.
Morale and engagement. If I know I'm going to be punished, that has an impact on my morale. But now taking it back to systems thinking, if the person that's supposed to provide input into the system, like let's say I'm at work, I'm an air traffic controller, then I make a mistake. The whole system benefits if I report honestly, right? If I'm motivated enough to report fully to the best of my knowledge. But if I know I'm going to be blamed, I'll sit back and try and be politically correct and also be technically correct and write what you want to know so that I don't be blamed. So
just give what you have to give, but not the real story.
Not necessarily the real story. So it's to the betterment of the system and also to the advantage of the organizations to actually take this seriously and look at it holistically so that the person on the ground doesn't feel left out, and let alone their morale being so low, because then in that case you'd get more incidents on things that are just something. If you change culturally, the culture of the organization, how they look at safety, that in and of itself can help boost the morale of the
and thereby make people more engaged and hopefully work towards this better safety performance, I think. Another question here from Samuel Okalebo from Kenya, actually. And it links again to the point of training we spoke about. The question of Samuel is, if SMS training would be required alongside other credentials, would it foster safety and help establish positive safety culture in Africa? And if yes, how would it do that? So would you think, based on your experience, for example, Mary, that having people go through SMS training almost before they even apply for a job, would that help our industry, you think? And if so, how?
I think it's important for people to go through SMS training. I'm not necessarily sure if it is when they're joining or maybe they get a bit of experience and then they join. Bit of experience is exposure for a few, maybe 1 or 2 months, so they can really understand the industry. But yes, I would say it will go a long way because now at least you begin to understand what safety is all about. When you're calling it management system, what does it entail? Yes.
You know, there's a really interesting story out of Japan. So Japan Airlines had this terrible accident back in 1985.
Okay.
And 510 people died in a horrific aircraft accident that really wasn't the company's fault. It was a repair that had actually been done to one of their aircraft that failed. And about 20 years after that, employees within the company said, we're starting to forget what it's like to get it wrong. So new people are coming into the business and they don't necessarily understand what's involved in safety. And we've achieved such good safety performance that people can be forgiven for thinking it's just what we do.
Yeah.
And not see how hard beneath the surface we have to keep paddling to deliver that performance. So every new employee into Japan Airlines goes to what they call their safety promotion center. They've got wreckage from the original accident. They've got stories from the people that were on board because they lived for about 20 minutes before the aircraft finally crashed. They wrote letters to their loved ones and so on. And it's an incredibly emotional experience for people to go through. But regardless of what role somebody's coming into that company to do,
they have to go
there and they have to understand what safety means and understand their role. It's incredibly powerful.
And thank you for bringing this up. I mean, it's like I've paid you to do this, but I mean, that's exactly, that has been the inspiration for Aviassist to build our first Aviassist Safety Promotion Center. It's nowhere near as sophisticated as the Japan Airlines, but we aim to get 3 of those centers over the next decade, 1 currently in Rwanda, possibly 1 in Western Africa and the 1 in Southern Africa, inspired by those stories indeed.
Brilliant.
To make people, feel, hear, smell and touch safety and unsafety as well, I'm afraid, sometimes, but it will bring home those stories indeed. It's time for our 3rd book, a report of the Royal Commission inquiry to the crash of Mount Erebus in Antarctica. So the important thing here is the R for Royal Commission. That's the first name of the author, if you like. Graham, this was your contribution. Tell us about it. What does it mean to you?
It makes me look like a real professor to have such a learned text. But actually, it was one of the first aviation safety things I read. So when I was a student, I came across this accident which had happened on a sightseeing flight, and sadly everybody had died.
Okay.
And when the initial investigation looked at it, they very much focused on the action of the crew, and it was an aircraft that suffered controlled flight into terrain into a mountain in Antarctica. But people weren't satisfied with that because really when you ask the question, why was this highly trained crew doing something that didn't feel desperately logical and what was behind that? Yeah. So they started a Royal Commission. The Royal Commission was led by an individual called Peter Mahon, and Peter Mahon published this report in 1981. Now that feels like an age ago.
Yeah.
It was 9. But it's a brilliant systems thinking investigation.
Okay.
So it went back and looked at the role of airline management, of the government, of the regulator, all sorts of things that it revealed.
Getting away from just looking at the individual cockpit crew.
And what it did was there were so many learning opportunities that beyond that very specific event, but it was really resisted. And sadly, Peter Mahon died a few years after he published the report, pretty much a broken man because the establishment didn't want to hear that there was something wrong at that level. If you read it now in the context of how we think about system safety, this guy was absolutely spot on, years ahead of his time, and it's just such a thrilling read, and that's why I brought that.
Okay, well, we'll have to make sure we share this with our audience, I think, out there in Africa. It's time for another short break from systems thinking. For the people who are new to Aviassist, here's a short video that explains what we are all about since 1995.
Africa, a continent on the rise. Africa is the world's 2nd biggest air transport growth market, and there is a lot to do. Africa is in the process of giving the continental aviation industry a place on the world map, on all fronts. This requires unprecedented efforts, even more so in a post-COVID-19 recovery. It means eliminating a backlog, but also respecting sustainability and CO2 emissions, building safety on the ground and in the air with technical and operational training. More than ever, international cooperation is vital to give what is arguably the most important economic link between Africa and the rest of the world, connecting people across the vast distances in Africa. An essential link, and that's why there is Avi-Assist. Africa and Avi-Assist. We have been leading, building and supporting safety promotion for the African aviation industry since 1995. Affordable, independent and professional. We stand up for aviation safety in Africa. We change attitudes and produce safety. Our professionals support African professionals, and we do it with passion by delivering on-site and online courses across Africa and more. Avi-Assist. Join us in Kigali or anywhere else on the continent. The African aviation industry needs you right now, more than ever. Avi-Assist.
So let's get back to systems thinking as we approach the end of today's episode. Here's a question from Sabina Mwanga in Uganda. And if I can bring this perhaps to both Marvin and Mary in particular, but actually also Graham, because you do flight operations there as well. The question is, how developed is voluntary reporting in your organization? Are people confident to speak up without fear of retribution? The easier answer, of course, is yes, yes. But I mean, can you qualify that? Mary, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I'll borrow from what he said. It's easier now because it's computerized. So when it's voluntary, then it's almost anonymous. So someone feels confident without having to feel the need for retribution, because sometimes it may not be management. It may be something that happened in a group, and some people really don't want it to be reported.
Like they're telling on somebody.
Telling on somebody else. So to avoid the stigmatization in the company after it's been reported, then it makes it easier.
So you're saying having moved, like Marvin also said, from a paper version to digital has helped and make that threshold lower, I guess. Okay. Marvin, anything from your side, if you think of the reporting cultures in the various places you've worked?
Yeah, I think eventually when people actually know what happens when something happens, and the whole process is clear and there's no secrets, you know that when something happens, there's an investigation that goes on. And if you trust your leadership to do the right thing, to consider every aspect of it, you'll be willing to contribute effectively to the whole system. So that way, you're not, you don't hide anything because you trust the whole system. So the consequences after reporting, that should be handled with care.
But have you seen that it has improved, indeed? Because that's, of course, how we...
Over time, in some systems more than the other. Yeah. There's some way it's obviously punitive and you get your punishment, you're put out of position, you get retraining. At times you don't need retraining. At times you just need probably counseling and support. Probably something that caused that incident or accident is not you, it's probably the environment you're working in. Probably it was too hot. Or perhaps the rostering is tight, there are less people working, you're tired. Mm-hmm. It's not...
That's not you, that's the system again.
It's the system. Yeah. So if I'm sitting there and I know that the whole system has got my back, it's not going to blame me, there's a better system to work in.
But again, I think if for fair, it's also sometimes people think that, this will be perfect in the Western setting. In Europe, they've got it all sorted out. But I mean, you've got this experience. I guess very few organizations, Graham, I don't know if you've seen that in your research. It's not necessarily so because you're a big organization in a rich country that you have reporting cultures that are mature. How is it in Cranfield, the reporting culture? Do you feel people feel free to report?
It's really interesting because we're such a small operation. So we fly 3 aircraft, the largest of which is a Saab 340. So everybody knows each other. It's a small team. And actually sometimes that can inhibit that reporting because you don't want to be embarrassed in front of...
And it's difficult to be anonymous because you almost know...
Absolutely. You have to approach it very differently. Now, if we go for a very formal reporting system, actually what started to happen at one point was people made a decision about whether they thought you wanted to know this or not. And we'd say, no, we want to know it all, and then let's figure out what there is to learn. And creating that culture has been challenged. Just as a comparison, British Airways gets about 4,000 reports a month. And a lot of that's based on trust, but it's not just trust that what I tell you will deal with sensitively. It's trust that you will do something with it. Now that's then about being transparent, that sometimes those reports tell you something that hasn't changed your risk picture. You don't need to actually change a procedure or a piece of hardware.
People still want to know.
But you want to know, because if we're having 3,000 and that's okay, then at the point we're having 4,000, that's not okay. We should do something about that particular thing. So helping people understand this is what we will do with it is such an important thing.
One thing
that trust thing works for all of these contexts.
So you're saying one thing is to have people feel free to report, but secondly also the organisation should do something with it. Yeah. And actually I think you were mentioning just having 3 aircraft, but at the same time many of the operators we work with in Africa are smaller operators. They're not comparable to British Airways or Kenya Airways or Ethiopian Airlines. And that's the majority of our customers as Aviassist. It's not just the airlines, it's also smaller air traffic control organisations, smaller airports. Mm-hmm. Right, well, a final question to you all. Imagine you find yourself in the elevator with your chief financial officer, and you've got 1 minute to explain, this $10,000 budget which you need. You're going to use it to improve systems thinking. What is that message to the CFO? What's the $10,000 going to be used for if it was up to you? Let's start in the middle, Graham.
Okay, so I think I would start with recognising that we don't own the system. We're just part of the system. It is a system of many systems. So anything we can do that helps us better understand each other's role would be a good investment. So the example I would give you is a helicopter operator who brought together their staff for a safety stand-up meeting, and it was really good. And they said, how do we make it better? And they said, we should invite our customers next time. So that's what they did. And having had a really good conversation with their customers as well, they said, what's the next step? Invite our competitors.
Oh, wow.
And actually, their investment was in sharing those different perspectives, because whether you're a competitor or not, if you're operating in the same environment, you're probably experiencing some of the same risks. And so the more we can do to promote that interaction, the better. So
you're saying create an environment where people feel free to stand up to talk about these from different perspectives, the regulator, operator.
Absolutely. You talked about Chatham House rules, whatever you can do to let people be honest. We've all been to sessions where people stand up and tell us the world is perfect and what a brilliant job they did. And we all sit in the background thinking, that's not what happens in my organisation. and far better to create an environment where somebody will stand up and say, we got this wrong, but this is what we learned from it.
Okay.
And anything that can create that, I think, is a really good investment.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, there are organisations in Africa, like the African Regional Airlines Association, who are increasingly creating those platforms, and we're very privileged to work with them and with the Flight Safety Foundation to, increase those type of meetings in Africa as well. Mary, coming to you, you're in the elevator, $10,000. What should we spend on?
Actually, I would tell my CFO that in this systemic thinking of the system, let's bring in the ones who do the manual work. I'm talking about the load controllers. I'm talking about the cleaners. Okay. I'm talking about the groomers. Reason being, sometimes they feel detached. They don't think they're part of the system.
Of the system, yeah.
Yes, so once we involve them and show how critical or crucial the work that they're doing is, then they will be more involved.
Okay, and we've also seen, as Aviassist in Africa, very often it then helps, and you see the same in some of our experts. For example, one of our experts comes from London City Airport, where they've set up cake and safety meetings, for example, because sometimes it helps if you say there's a Fanta or a Coca-Cola to be had, to bring perfect. So that's where you we can buy a lot of Fantas for that, actually. Yes. Marvin, back to you. You're in the elevator, 1 minute.
I'm thinking culture, I'm thinking attitude, but because there's a limit of 10,000, I'll spend it on training. Yeah. Training the leaders so that they can be exposed to the new information and highlight the advantages of them considering safety and systems thinking specifically as important, and highlighting the advantages of it. I think I'll go with training.
Okay, and you will be spending the 10,000 on the Coke and Fantas for the management to make sure they come in.
For the training and hopefully for the exposure. I think when you see something working, that would trigger something that would make you want to change.
Or perhaps if you see something that's not working, which people have been telling you all the time that's not working.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, lovely panel members. I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining me here in the focus sessions today, and for traveling from your respective duty stations from Nairobi, the UK, and Amsterdam. And then to you lovely viewers out there from Djibouti to Senegal to Rwanda and Zambia, thank you for tuning in for safety. If you enjoyed today's focus sessions, please be our ambassador and tell your friends about the work of aviAssist. Feel free to post a picture of yourself with your certificate from this session on LinkedIn. If you want to help us continue these focus sessions, become a friend of aviAssist. And you can do that in our web shop, www.aviassist.org/shop. Come and visit us at our first aviAssist Safety Promotion Center, the ASPC Rwanda. Lots of exciting courses coming up in 2024 in our center at the University of Rwanda. We will also have a number of courses take place at Landover Aviation Business School in Lagos, Nigeria, early in May. This includes a team leadership in aviation course and a human factors in aviation course. We will be delivering this year's edition of our incident investigation course in Windhoek. That will be from the 24th to the 27th of June and will be done in partnership with the Directorate of Aircraft Accident and Incident Investigations from Namibia. Then we'll have a peer support course and an air law course in South Africa from the 11th until the 20th of September in Johannesburg in partnership with Aviation Africa 2024. And please don't forget, only you can target safety. We look forward to continuing our mission with you to improve African aviation safety. Join us for the next focus session on the 29th of May, when we'll be talking about change management. Same time, same frequency. For now, we say Odabo to our Yoruba listeners and have a good day to the rest of you.